And thank you for watching. 2016 mayoral candidate Carole Smith will be with us, and we're trying to cover all the city council races as well as the mayor race. So welcome to the show, Carole.
Thank you.
And you know, I would think that deciding to run for mayor is somewhat intimidating, but maybe I'm wrong. But what made you decide to run for mayor?
Well, I've been thinking about it for the last year and talking to my husband about it, because it's not just me doing it.
Right.
It's going to affect him too. So finally we decided that this would be a good thing to do. But the reasons I'm running is I'm more interested in seeing citizens' input into city government. I think we've been left out for too long. The city goes behind closed doors and makes a lot of decisions for us and then just asks us to vote on one or two things. And I think that we would have a better, more healthier community if we allowed citizen input earlier on and throughout the process, so citizens have a buy-in to whatever the city wants to do. And I'm tired of seeing unrelated fees showing up on the water bill for the city of Salem. I think the street light fee is what finally did it for me. It wasn't bad enough that we had the runoff fee that used to be paid for out of our taxes, and now we have to pay a special fee to pay for that. And I'd like to remove the parking meters from the library. That's been a sticking point for me for a long time, because we have such a wonderful free library in Salem, and then we tax people to use it. If we're going to have a free library, let's have a free library so all citizens can use it.
And it's a very good library.
It's a great library.
I have lived in lots of different places, and Salem has a very, very good library and a very good staff too. So one of the big issues that I've been following is infrastructure projects that we're seeing come up that we saw in previous elections, and as the police facility, at least now they've decided on a location for the police facility, and also what is referred to as the third bridge. And those are two big projects, and so I'd like to know how you feel about those and what you would like to see happen. And there was some citizen input at the last police facility meeting, so that the site was picked. And so what are your views on those two items?
Well, it's interesting. I went back and watched some of your interviews from 2 years ago, and oddly enough, we're still talking about the same thing 2 years later. Nothing's been done. Nothing's moved forward. The police facility, I'm not real happy with the site. I think they picked whatever was out there that was for sale, and I don't think that's the highest and best use for the O'Brien site. I think that should be housing, especially workforce housing, for a lot of the employees that work downtown and other people that work in lower wage jobs. I think that's an opportunity. That's a huge site that we could build a lot of housing on. But if we're going to build a police station on that site, to me that's not a really good use for that neighborhood either. The police station, I think that the station that the people from Chicago have designed is way bigger than we'll ever need. I think that they based it on 2.8 new officers every year added to the police force, when in reality, over the last 35 years, we've really only added 1.6 officers a year. So we're already bigger than we need. I just think the people in Chicago don't understand our community. And I think a lot more citizen input earlier on in this whole project would have made it a better project with more buy-in from the citizens.
Well, I attended some of those police facility meetings that the task force was having, and it seemed like they had an agenda that didn't match what people in the audience were thinking about. I noticed that, because there would quite often be people getting up and speaking at those, but it seemed like they were not being really listened to, that they would hear their testimony, but they were doing their best to ignore it. And some of the sites that the final two sites that they came up with was the Leslie Street and the O'Brien site. The Leslie Street was added because it didn't meet all the criteria. It wasn't the High Point one. The O'Brien one was. And I, for the life of me, didn't know why they even, because they're going to have so many buildings that they're going to have to probably declare eminent domain on So that, to me, was a huge problem, because now you're not even going to be able to start building right away.
Yeah. Well, I think the Leslie site was thrown in at the last minute to make the O'Brien site look better to people, and it was the site that the mayor has always wanted to have the police station up at City Hall. She wants all her domain in one place. And I don't think that's good for the community. I'm more for a smaller police station. We absolutely need a police station. That's
a new one.
A new one, yeah. If you've seen the police station at City Hall, it's really bad. But I'm not against having a couple of precincts out in the areas with the most amount of crime. I think that the officers need to be out there, and maybe they're out there for 5 years and the precinct moves to another area. I don't understand this concept that we either have to have precincts or a main station. Why can't we have a little bit of both?
Well, I know in some of the cities I've lived in, what they'll have is they'll have a small little station in a strip mall. You know, and so the rent's fairly inexpensive, but they can still do a lot of work there, and you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money building it up. And usually if it's in a strip mall, there's parking.
Right.
And so that, to me, seems to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, because I've heard various city council members say, well, every policeman has his own office because they're in a vehicle. Well, that's not the same, you know, and I think that sometimes having a presence in a neighborhood makes it you part of the neighborhood. And I think it makes people more comfortable with going to the police if they've got somebody right there.
Right, somebody that they've known and they've seen and they're familiar with.
Yeah, because we don't walk beats anymore.
No, well, they do downtown.
Yeah, that's true. But so what about the third bridge?
The third bridge to me is a boondoggle at this point. You know, the other two bridges are owned by the state of Oregon. Why aren't we working with the state of Oregon and our legislators to build a bridge in the future that belongs to the state, not to the city? Because mainly the third bridge is going to take a lot of traffic that's coming from Portland and crossing through Salem to get out to Highway 18 to go to the coast. So really, the Salem citizens shouldn't have to pay for a bridge that's more for everybody in the state to use. So the other two bridges are owned by the state, so I don't understand why the third bridge shouldn't be also owned and built by the state. And I just don't see that we have any funding for that bridge. I understand that people in West Salem mostly support the bridge and want the bridge, but I wonder if there's other opportunities to solve this problem or to shave it down in different ways. Like, what if we put a ramp from Commercial Street onto the bridge that at 5 o'clock it just flows. There's no stoplight for that lane. So it just flows over the bridge. We've created this problem by putting stoplights all along Wallace Marine Park, or Wallace Marine Road. So now we're stopping traffic and it's backing up onto the bridge. The bridge is not the problem. The problem was created by the city when they put all those stoplights in.
Well, I noticed in the morning that 22 eastbound sometimes is blocked for a long distance back to Eola Drive because you've got an awful lot of cars trying to come in at one place. And I've often thought, why isn't there like a commuter bus over in West Salem to bring people over downtown? Because you know there's a bunch of people that work at various state offices here in Salem. So you could at least take that portion of the traffic away. And to me,
I think that's a great idea. That's why we should have citizens have input. Citizens have the best ideas because they know our community.
Well, it's kind of like in business that, you know, a lot of times decisions are made at the top without realizing there's people that are doing the day-to-day job that need
down
to
below.
Yeah, and sometimes their input, how to make things better, is much more efficient, because they know the workflow.
Right.
And you're right, if people aren't included in the decision making, they don't feel part of the process.
We don't get the best decision.
No, because you need lots of input from, because a lot of times, and you'll see this, where people have thought they know all the angles, and then somebody will bring something up, oh my God, we didn't even think about that. And that's why you do need
I'll give
the
you a
citizens.
good example of that. When I was on the Downtown Development Advisory Board several years ago, they hired a consultant to come in because they wanted to, the city wanted to make an exit out of Chemeketa Parkade onto Center Street. And so the consultant said, well, you need to buy the Tallman Piano Building and knock it down and then build this ramp off. You know, we're looking at $1 million. And the tear down of a historic building. So this got in the paper, and some man, bless his heart, wrote a short letter, says, why don't you just put a counterflow lane out of Chemeketa Parkade for like 20 feet onto Marion? You saved the historic building. You didn't have to pay to knock it down. I thought, what a great, and that's exactly what the city did. They did that great solution.
Well,
thank you, citizens.
Yes. And one of the other issues that's come up quite a bit, and you mentioned it before about the homeless situation. And it's not just the homeless situation. We have a real lack of affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your ideas about how to take care of those problems?
Well, you know, I think first of all we need to stop studying the problem, because every community across the states has already studied it. Some have implemented things that are actually working. We don't need to study it for another year. What we need to do is start trying some of the things that have worked in other communities. I heard from somebody that people build tiny houses here, but the code doesn't allow them to put
That's
them in
right.
their backyards. So we can build them here, but we can't use them here. Well, let's be more flexible with that. I think tiny houses might be part of a solution to homelessness. I think that possibly the vacant buildings on the old state hospital grounds could be possible to use for homelessness. And that's a lot. That's a lot of housing they have
A lot
there.
of acreage too.
Yeah.
And if you had small homes, you know, like some of the homeless people I know here in town, you know, it's their possessions. They have to carry it around with them all the
Right.
time. It expends a great deal of energy trying to keep it dry during the winter months. And also, one of them gave me his backpack to watch for a little while. I could barely lift it. And
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is he
know.
had everything he needed, all his paperwork, all this stuff that he needed to keep safe and dry. And at that point, he was basically sleeping under one of the bridges, and he was, you know, worried about it getting.
Yeah. I think we're all one major illness away from homelessness in America. And we need to start addressing the problem and creating solutions rather than studying it. We need to take action.
Well, and that's generally what the American way has been, is people not talking about things, but doing things. I mean, that's the way it seemed when I was young anyway, that people would go and do things. And if you think about it, it's like when I was young, they were just building all the interstates, made getting from place to place a whole lot easier. But I you know, sometimes think that maybe people driving in their own individual cars sometimes creates other problems going on.
Yeah.
Maybe we wouldn't be talking about a third bridge if not everybody was in their own private vehicle. And,
Right.
you know, it's funny because I was some of the arguments about expanding bus service, you know, when they were going to have a tax, and they were talking about, well, the buses are only like 25% full, or and like that. And I'm thinking, well, you know, if you looked at the third bridge, most of those vehicles are less than 25% full.
Exactly.
So,
You know, I wonder, can we stimulate more bicycle commuters? The money was approved in the 2008 Roads and Bridges bond to build a bike and pedestrian trail all the way from Salem town to the railroad bridge. So the money's there, it's just sitting there, and the city is refusing to build it, even though there's a group of volunteers who want to help build it. Now, I don't understand that. If they're worried about the bridge and the traffic backup, couldn't we supply alternative methods of getting to work by building that bike path?
yeah, and I know that I don't feel comfortable biking downtown.
No.
I get to a certain spot and I'm saying, you
Yep.
know, I'm trying to figure out how to get over to the pedestrian bridge over the Willamette. And it gets very tricky when you get close to downtown, trying to maneuver over
Oh,
to
yeah.
that area.
And people are not aware of bicycles.
No. And barely aware of pedestrians, it seems, because we've had a number of problems in that area as well. And one of the things that I see anyway is the traffic is generally too fast in certain places, and they need to slow it down. but that doesn't seem to happen.
No. We study things, but we don't take action.
And I was noticing that they did a pedestrian kind of sting thing where they would send officers to cross streets to see, you know, who was stopping, who wasn't. And they did this like once, and then they did it like 6 months later. Well, I think you need to do it like every day for a week or two.
Yeah.
And, say, I'm going to
do
it.
something meaningful.
Right. I mean, you got to break people of the habit.
Yes.
And it's not going to happen just in one day.
Exactly.
And so I think that there's that. Plus, there's an awful lot of people. I know there's a law that says you're not supposed to be texting or
on your cell phone.
On your cell phone, but I still see it a lot.
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot.
So do I.
So, are there any other parts of the pedestrian safety issue that
Well,
you've been thinking about?
I'm concerned about that because I walk almost everywhere. But I really have to make eye contact with that driver before I step out into the street. And downtown has only one, I think there's only one mid-block crossing that's actually a legal one, where it's, you know, the stripes are on the ground and the pedestrian pole is up above it, and that's the one right by where I live, right by Court Street Dairy Lunch and
okay.
Reed Opera House. That's a legal mid-block crossing. The rest of them don't have any signage.
Oh, you know, that's interesting because there's alleys there, and like there's bricks or something. So I always assumed that it was a crosswalk. And I mean, I was treating it as one anyway.
Yeah. But you know, the biggest thing about downtown, and particularly the alleys crossing the sidewalks, when cars come down the alley, you have to cross the sidewalks. And that's one of the major complaints from women with small children, with toddlers, is that they bring them down when they're in their strollers, and maybe a kid hanging onto a stroller. But when they're out of the stroller, we don't see those kids again until they're in junior high or high school. And when I started asking parents, why don't you bring your toddlers downtown, they say it's too dangerous. And when you really talk to them about what is the danger that you're perceiving, it's the alleys. Because a lot of people don't realize you have to stop before you cross a sidewalk. When you're coming out of an alley onto a street, you are required to stop before you cross that sidewalk. Most people just honk their horn and think that the pedestrians are a bunch of chickens that'll spread and they can drive through, and that's not true. We need to change behavior that way.
And that's kind of what I was getting at with pedestrian safety, is you need to enforce that daily for like a week or two to get people's behavior to change, because otherwise it won't change.
No. Well, and maybe put up a stop sign at the end of each alley.
Oh, yeah.
And then ticket people that don't stop. I mean, fines seem to work.
Yeah. Well, yes, that is an incentive to change your way of doing
behavior.
things.
Yeah.
So we didn't talk too much about the homeless situation or the lack of affordable housing. So do you have any ideas about how Salem could address those?
Well, I think there's a big need for both of those, both housing for people that are without homes and people that are just lower income people, more affordable housing. And I'm not quite sure how to approach that. That's why I think citizen input would be invaluable in solving this problem. And I don't think it's going to take a year of study. I think it would take a few meetings and then start on something. Designate some money and start.
Get a project going to see how it works.
See if it works. Yeah.
And one of the things is that you got to try to manage the cost, because I've seen other cities do things and they don't manage the cost very well. And so they end up with something that's very expensive for the homeless. And quite often it's more like transitional housing.
Right.
And they want them to move someplace else. But here in Salem, we have vouchers that are turned back every month or every quarter because they can't find a place.
Right.
So it's a kind of a two-pronged thing where you need to start building some affordable housing. And like you were saying, close to downtown, where, you know, people are in like the service economy need to be able to afford someplace close to downtown where they're working.
Right.
And that would also help the traffic situation because they wouldn't have to.
Right. You know, I wished I'd been on city council a few years ago when the Mountain West people decided to build the big apartment structure that they're finishing now, because the city gave that corporation quite a bit of city money to help them along. Well, in Portland, when the city gives money to a private developer like that, they require some things, like some low-income housing on the bottom floors.
Right.
You know, we could have asked them to include those kinds of things, and we just didn't. But I think that's an important thing. If the city is going to give loans and grants to developers, I think we can ask for something in return. We can ask for some of those units to be low-income housing.
So then you have a mix of people in the
exactly.
building.
They do that in Portland all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good model too, because I think, well, you'll see this in communities where there's gated communities.
Right.
And now there's like a separation. People don't understand what's going on with other people in their same city.
Right.
And you need a mix of things. And what I've seen too is a lot of young people are choosing not to buy cars.
Right.
And so they need
Right.
they need places close to where they work.
Right.
And there's a fairly healthy downtown. I mean, right now, from my travels, Salem actually does have a downtown.
We have one, yeah.
Yeah, but
I'll admit that.
yeah, but I mean, it's working, I think, to a certain degree. It could be better, but the problem is that a lot of places, the downtown is just shuttered down, usually at 5 o'clock in the evening, and I would like to see more housing for young people and like that, or people with low incomes that they could actually live.
You know, why
where they
hasn't the city or the county and the transit district built on the north part of Courthouse Square? To me, that would be a perfect low-income apartment building. You could have a solid wall where the buses are, so you don't get any of that, but they would look out over Chemeketa Street. It'd be beautiful. And they built enough parking underground to do that kind of a project. But they never built it. You know, why aren't they? Let's find out. Let's identify those hurdles and get over them.
Well, I think that's something that I've been to a few city council meetings, and it seems like people that are there to bring up their point of view aren't treated very respectfully.
No,
I mean, that's
they
been
aren't.
my personal impression of what happens there. And I would like to see, at least with the next mayor, that attitude toward
The citizens should be treated with respect.
yeah.
If they're taking their time to come down to City Hall and tell you what they think, then you should respect them and honor them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you don't need to get in an argument with them.
No.
You can listen to their testimony, and if it makes sense to you, you vote, you know, however you feel is appropriate at that point. But to, you know, make people feel uncomfortable by grilling them, I think is a bad precedent. And one of the things that I noticed that happened with the police facility meeting that they had, where the public was invited to kind of speak, none of the city council or the mayor interacted with them. They just let them speak.
Right.
And it was a much better meeting. They got all the people that wanted to talk, got to talk. And I thought that meeting went a lot smoother than what I've seen in the past. And people, I think it created a better sense of harmony when
It
people...
did, but I would rather see people ask questions.
Well,
Because then that promotes discussion.
mhm.
And discussion is something we're missing. I don't know if you've noticed, but about 80% of the votes over the last couple of years at City Council have been unanimous votes with
I've noticed.
no discussion. Now, how many times in your life have you seen 9 different people come in and agree on the same thing with no discussion?
I don't very often see that.
No, I don't either. Certainly not 80% of the time.
No.
So there's a problem there.
So kind of a change in attitude at
Yes.
these meetings and outreach
Well,
to
the
the
city
community
should be
too.
friendly with the citizens should be part of government.
That's a
It's-
democracy, isn't it?
It is. I had an argument one time with Councilor Bennett when I said, well, that's our money you're spending. And you're not asking us how we want it spent. He said, that's not your money. That's our money. So I went home and I called my accountant and I said, okay, Joe, whose money is it? And he said, well, the money belongs to the citizens, but it's held in trust for the citizens' benefit through the city council. So it is our money, but the city council is supposed to be spending it for our benefit. But if they don't ask us what we want, how can they spend it for our benefit?
That's a good question. And, you know, we've covered a lot of the issues that I think are important, but, I mean, what other issues do you see that
Well,
the
there's
city
a big,
of Salem needs to address?
There's a big issue for me in deferred maintenance. Originally, when they were going to do the $75 million bond, and they were going to build a new police station on the Civic Center and seismically upgrade both City Hall and the library, which I think needs to be done, along with the Marion and Center Street bridges. I lost my train of thought now. I went too far.
Oh, okay.
The deferred maintenance. They were going to use some of that bond money to catch up on deferred maintenance at City Hall, like $20 million worth. Well, then I looked into it and I found out the city of Salem has over $200 million of deferred maintenance on city-owned structures. Those are structures us, the citizens, own, but the city's not keeping them up. And so I ran into the city manager of Kaiser one day and I said, well, how much deferred maintenance do you have in Kaiser? And he said, none. He said, we budget for maintenance every year, so we don't have.
So they've been using those funds for other things.
Well, I think every year we come up with $1 million a year deficit in the city budget. Well, 80% of that is PERS, increasing staff salaries and paying for their benefits. So I think what the city's been doing is they keep the staff on, they pay their salaries, but they do that by cutting services.
And that's why we have bad sidewalks, among other things.
I think so.
Because I know in my neighborhood it's a serious issue.
Oh yeah, it is all over.
So what are some of the other issues that you'd like to see improved or at least thought about, maybe?
I'd like to see a sustainability commission. I know they talked about it at one time. I don't think they ever did anything on it. I would have liked to have seen, after the whole rewrite of the tree ordinance, I would have liked to have seen a tree committee and get rid of the one we currently have that really isn't doing much. You know, that's what the citizens wanted. Why didn't we get it?
Well, I think that's a matter of control. And it kind of comes back to your point about who's benefiting. And I think, from my observations anyway, that a lot of times they defer to the staff when they're making decisions. And I've heard city councilmen say this, well, that was a staff decision. And but the city council is supposed to be setting the policy for those decisions, and if the staff isn't really doing what you want them to do, you need to tell them. Not just say, well, that was a staff decision. To me, that's an easy way out.
I think the city council and mayor should be the vision for Salem, and that should include input from all the citizens of Salem about what we want to be. How do we want to brand ourselves? How do we want to market Salem? What do we want our downtown to function as? Is it still a retail center, or has it become an entertainment center? You know, it's shifting, and I don't think people are realizing that. It is no longer retail downtown. It's restaurants, bars, and entertainment. And another thing I'd like to change when I'm mayor is I'd like to, the city for some reason zoned out brew pubs and distilleries out of the downtown. Now, brew pubs and distilleries are what is keeping Bend lively, it's keeping Portland lively, but we zoned them out of our downtown. I'd like to change that. There was no reason for that.
Well, I have to agree with you, because I lived in Sacramento before I moved here, and they certainly allow brew pubs. In fact, they really helped them.
Encourage them.
Yes.
We should.
And that did create quite a lively section of town anyway. Well, Carole, it's been very good talking to you. We're just about out of time, so I want to thank you for coming down and sharing your thoughts about being mayor of Salem. And so I want to wish you all the luck that you need, and we'll be back next time.